Say something out loud. Anything at all. To do that, your brain just coordinated about 100 separate muscles. Your lungs pushed a controlled stream of air upward at a pressure you were holding steady without noticing. Two small flaps of tissue in your throat vibrated somewhere between 100 and 250 times a second. Your tongue, lips, and jaw moved into a new position roughly every tenth of a second and never once collided. And you did all of it while thinking about something else entirely. Nothing else on Earth does this. Every human group ever contacted has had a full language. There are no exceptions. Not one. There are about 7,000 of them alive right now. And nobody knows where any of it came from. This is the hardest question in the study of human origins, and it is hard for one very simple reason. Speech is air. It leaves nothing behind. A stone tool can sit in the ground for 1,000,000 years. A spoken word is gone in half a second. Writing only shows up about 5,000 years ago, and that is the blink of an eye. So there is no direct evidence, and there never will be. We are studying something that cannot fossilize. In the 1800s, this produced so much confident nonsense that scholars simply gave up. In 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris wrote a rule into its founding statutes. The society would not accept any paper on the origin of language, ever. It was not a ban on the question. It was a ban on guessing. And it held, more or less, for 100 years. What broke it was not linguistics. It was anatomy, genetics, and archaeology. Three completely different ways of getting at a thing that left no trace. Start with the body. Talking is a physical act, and physical acts need hardware. The first piece of hardware anyone went looking for was a small bone called the hyoid. It sits in your throat, above the windpipe, and it is the only bone in your body that touches no other bone. It floats in muscle. Its entire job is to be an anchor for the tongue. Chimpanzee hyoids are shaped differently from ours, so the hyoid became a test. In 1983, excavators at Kebara Cave in Israel found a Neanderthal skeleton with the hyoid still in place. It was the first one anybody had ever found. Baruch Ahrensberg and his colleagues published it in 1989. It was essentially identical to a modern human hyoid, which was a problem for everyone who had spent a century assuming Neanderthals grunted. But a hyoid on its own does not prove speech. It proves a tongue anchored the way ours is. So people went looking for other signals, and here's where the field gets messy. In 1998, a team argued that the hole in the skull carrying the tongue nerve was larger in humans than in apes. Bigger nerve, finer tongue control, therefore speech. Measure the hole in a fossil skull, and you could date talking. Within a year, another team measured a much larger sample and found the sizes overlapped completely. The signal was not there. The method was quietly dropped. That is worth sitting with. This is a field that publishes a criterion and then kills it. A more durable clue came from the chest, of all places. The nerves controlling the muscles you breathe out with pass through a canal in the vertebrae of your upper back. Speech needs unusually fine control of the outbreath. You hold a whole sentence on one slow, metered exhale. And Matt Clarnon and Gwen Hewitt found that canal is wide in modern humans and wide in Neanderthals. In Homo ergaster 1.5 million years ago, it is narrow like an ape's. Then there are the ears, and the ears are the best single piece of evidence anyone has. At Sima de los Huesos in northern Spain, at the bottom of a 13-meter shaft, lie the remains of at least 28 individuals. They are about 430,000 years old. Ignacio Martinez and Juan Luis Arzuaga reconstructed the tiny bones of their outer and middle ear and modeled what those ears could hear. Chimpanzee hearing has a dip in sensitivity right between 2 and 4 kilohertz. Human hearing has a peak there instead, and that band is where consonants live. The T, the K, the S, the P, the sounds that carry most of the actual information in speech. The Sima ears had the human pattern, not the chimpanzee one. 400,000 years ago, something at the bottom of that shaft was tuned to listen for consonants. That is not proof of speech. Ears can be tuned by any complicated call system, but you do not evolve a receiver for a signal that nobody is sending. The second approach came from a family in London, known in the scientific literature only as the KE family. Across 3 generations, about half of them had a severe and very specific problem. They struggled to produce the fine sequenced mouth movements that speech requires. They also had trouble with grammar, in ways that had nothing to do with their mouths at all. In 2001, Cecilia Lai, Simon Fisher, and Anthony Monaco traced it to a single letter change in a single gene. The gene is called FOXP2. The newspapers immediately christened it the language gene. It is not the language gene. It is not remotely the language gene. FOXP2 is a transcription factor. Its job is switching other genes on and off, hundreds of them. It is in mice. It is in crocodiles. It is in songbirds, where it is essential for learning to sing. What makes the human version interesting is that it differs from the chimpanzee version by 2 amino acids. 2 changes in a gene that had barely budged in the previous 75 million years. For a few years, this looked like the smoking gun, and the date looked satisfyingly recent. Then in 2007, Johannes Krauss sequenced FOXP2 out of Neanderthal bone. They had our version. Both changes, not a recent human novelty at all. And in 2018, a much larger genomic study went back over the evidence for strong recent selection on FOXP2 and found it did not hold up. So the gene everyone had built a story on turned out to be older, more widely shared, and considerably less special than advertised. This keeps happening. Every clean, single-cause story about the origin of language has broken. The honest summary is that language is not one trait sitting behind one switch. It is breath control, and hearing, and memory, and imitation, and a deep interest in what other people are thinking, all stacked on top of each other. Most of those parts have their own separate evolutionary history, running on their own separate clocks. Which is why hunting for the moment language began may simply be the wrong question. The third approach ignores anatomy completely and asks something different. Never mind their bodies. What do? The logic is that certain behaviors are extremely difficult to pull off without language. Making an object that stands for something else, for a start. At Blombos Cave on the South African coast, Christopher Hinchelwood's team found pieces of red ochre. One has a deliberate cross-hatched pattern scratched into its polished surface about 77,000 years ago. It is not a tool. It is not decoration on a tool. It is a mark that means something. And a mark that means something only works if 2 people already agree on what it means. Then there's the crossing. Australia has been cut off from Asia by deep open water for millions of years. You cannot walk there. You never could. People were living at Managua in northern Australia around 65,000 years ago. That took a deliberate sea crossing with enough people aboard to start a population that did not die out. Somebody had to plan that. Somebody had to persuade other people to get into the boat. On the island of Sulawesi, in a cave called Linguistic, there is a painting of a pig and 3 human-like figures. In 2024, a team dated it to at least 51,000 years. It is the oldest known figurative art anywhere on Earth. And it is not a portrait. Those figures are doing something. It is a scene. A scene is a story, and a story painted on a wall is almost certainly a story that was told out loud first. None of this is proof. Every single one of these arguments has a serious critic. But the pattern across a whole continent and across tens of thousands of years is very hard to explain any other way. Now here is the part that changed how I think about all of it. We keep asking when language appeared, as though it were an invention, like the wheel. But we have actually watched a language appear, from nothing, within living memory. In the late 1970s, schools for deaf children opened in Managua, in Nicaragua, and after the revolution, they expanded fast. Before that, deaf children there had grown up isolated, each one inventing a private set of gestures with their own family. Suddenly, there were 50 of them in one building, then 200, then 400. Nobody taught them sign language because none of the teachers knew one. The lessons were in spoken Spanish, and they were failing badly. So on the playground and on the buses, the children pooled their private gestures into a rough shared system. It worked, but it was clumsy, a bag of signs without much in the way of grammar. And then the next intake arrived, younger, 4, 5, 6 years old. They learned the older children's clumsy system, and they refused to leave it clumsy. They regularized it. They broke smooth motions into separate, reusable parts. They invented consistent word order and agreement and grammatical machinery the older children had never once used. Judy Kegel and Sung has documented this happening cohort after cohort as it happened. The children who built the grammar could not have been copying it from anyone. There was nothing to copy. Nicaraguan Sign Language is now a full human language with native speakers, and we know almost exactly when it began. And it tells you something no fossil can. Language did not need a genius to invent it. It needed a group of people who badly wanted to be understood. And it needed children young enough to take whatever they were handed and quietly turn it into a system. Give a human community the raw ingredients, and language assembles itself in about a generation. Which suggests the question the fossils are being asked is badly framed. There was probably never a first speaker, never first word, never a morning when a hominin said something and the world changed. There was a long, slow thickening. Gesture, then sound, then structure, over hundreds of thousands of years, with no single line to step across. Here's what I keep coming back to. Everything else in this series has been about things people made. Clothes, tools, fires, meals. Language is the only one with no artifact at all. You cannot dig it up. You cannot put it in a museum case. And it is the only one that every human being alive still uses every day in essentially the same form. Someone in the Ice Age and someone on a bus this morning are running identical equipment. Not similar equipment. Identical as far as anybody has ever been able to measure. So think about the last thing you said to another person today. There's a decent chance that nobody in the entire history of our species had ever said that exact sentence before. And the person you said it to understood it instantly, without effort, without noticing that anything remarkable had happened. That is the trick. A finite number of sounds, a finite set of rules, and an infinite number of things you are able to mean. It is the oldest technology we have, and it is the only one that nobody ever had to teach us.